Hello, everyone. Happy New Year. Welcome to our Slate demo series on HTML 101. I'm very excited for this one. For those of you who know me or not, my name is Nick Porcella. I'm the Assistant Director of Slate Trainings with Carnegie. I'm a former high school teacher, admissions recruiter, and college marketer. You notice that coder is not on that list. We will talk about that. My Carnegie colors are pink, green, and maroon. I am the industrious and meticulous philosopher. So where are we heading today? Well, coding in Slate does not need to be scary. I will be the first to say you can go a long way with advanced knowledge, JavaScript, CSS, and that's great. But anyone can learn basic HTML. We're going to be talking about that today in three basic levels. We'll be chatting about the background and context of all of this, as well as demonstrating within Slate's text editor called the WYSIWYG, and via the deliver lens. I do that intentionally. It's a great place to start for folks new to this, but it's also where a lot of you may live as you're editing mailings and trying to tinker code here and there. So that will be our springboard. For that, we're going to actually head over to Slate. And I have a very basic mailing built. We don't need to think about things like a recipient list or anything fancy here because this is just for our training today. And so if I click edit message, we see, again, the bare bones of a mailing here in order to work off of. We're going to be living in this source button. Everyone here has probably seen it. Some of you have likely clicked into it and been curious or maybe a little scared. You don't need to be. I'm going to be empowering you throughout this session that if you don't work in this area, you can, and there's benefit to it. So let's click on it. And that brings us into the CSS, the HTML. There is a lot we could do here. We could spend hours in this talking about it through the lens of accessibility or what the different sections mean. Our goals for today are intentionally modest. I want to introduce a few core concepts, really to orient yourself to what's here. The first thing that I'm going to give you is just a little bit of, I guess, background or context. Some of what we're going to be looking at today is inherently color dependent. It's not my favorite thing, but for example, we have sections in green, in blue, in red, in black, one in pink here. That's more than a Slate issue that is global, and that's not something we'll be able to solve today. So mainly what I want to say is wherever color is dependent, I will also be clicking in order to highlight something. I did mention background as in admissions counselor, as well as working in higher ed, but I said I'm not a coder. And while I know enough HTML to get by, that's the key. I am not somebody who could write everything we see here from scratch. And that is most certainly not our goal because you don't need that to get better at your work in Slate or to be a Slate expert. Because in some ways, this is a foreign language and it takes time to develop. So with that, where are we going on our journey today? I said it was modest, but it will be impactful. We're going to be speaking about these sections in green called elements. We'll be talking about the blue called attributes, the red, these are called values, and then we'll also be mentioning where the front end comes into play. So first things first, let's talk about these sections in green. These are formally called elements. I like to think of them as containers. And there are a lot of options. We will only be discussing a few, probably the ones that are most relevant to your work in Slate. And the very first one I've clicked on is head. This is the one that's really going to help us orient and will for you too when you're in your own demo mailing in your instance of Slate, playing around after this session, I hope. But if I click on head and I scroll a few lines down, you notice that there is another section that highlights, and that would be referred to as the closing tag of that element. It does just that. There's an opening, there's a closing. And we can see on this next line, it's going to be the same principle. I click on this word body, and in this case, I scroll quite a bit. Bear with me. And it closes here down at the bottom. That is our first point of orientation. And that's hopefully the only place where we're going to scroll that much today. But we have the head, we have the body. The head is going to be definitely more intermediate, more advanced. That might be future training, so let us know if that's of interest. But this head section is a lot of CSS, a lot of styling. Our focus today is going to be really in the body. And this is where if you're learning by doing, using your own as a sandbox leader, find this body, find where it opens, find where it closes. This is what the mailing is going to be. really. Now, it will be impacted by what's above, but what is in the body is really what we're going to see, especially in this training landscape. So green are elements. You can get by in Slate with just a few in your vocabulary. We've got a table here, as well as some others that start with a T. The table is a huge one to know. A lot of what is done in coding, not just in Slate, is done in tabular form. Items are grouped in tables. There's different styling, different rows of data. So we have a table here. And this is where I also like to point out some resources. I am a huge advocate that there are some great tools in this world for beginners. You can go just search in Google for a free HTML renderer. This is the one I use, especially for training. And if I actually go look at some code here, let me see if I can click around to find one that is more digestible. See, line 74, there we go, closes on line 104. If I copy and paste that code from the opening table down to that closing on 104, so Control C, and I drop this in here, it's actually going to render for me what was in Slate. And in this case, we see it's the section of your logo. It's a table. This is how the information is displayed. Might be a really helpful resource for you. You can also rely on AI. I've used ChatGPT before to tell me what's going wrong with my code or what is this even doing. Use these tools. A lot of them are free. But in this case, that's a table. We know that that would have been the section here at the top with that logo. That is all an element is. It is a container, and it allows us to look at other info. Now, one thing to point out before we transition over into some of these other areas is that these greens sort of indent further and further, and that's typical of coding. These things drill down, they nest. So you will find this be the case. In the case of the table, we have table body is available. TR is table row. We have TD is table data. Explore these things. That's the best way to learn about them. But let's shift over to the blue. Now, I like to think of blue as these are providing additional information about the element. They're called attributes. I'm going to scroll just a little to keep things interesting. I don't want to rely on the same snippets of code each time. So let's go to line 206. We have a table, which we just learned about. And then we can make some educated guesses about what these attributes are. We see that there's a line that's probably alignment. Cell padding is padding, spacing is spacing. Class might be, in this case, whether it's responsive, for example. That's not what this one says, but class. We have a role, which if you're into accessibility, you know what that one is. And then style. There are more. We see some others below. But these are attributes. They provide additional information about the element. And so we would know in this case that if we were to go back out, the front end of the mailing, we have a table here. It is center aligned. There's no padding. There's no spacing. And we have some style. It's a great segue into the red. I always talk about these attributes and their values in red together. And the values define the attribute. I find these to be the simplest. Take one more look at a different section. We'll go to line 161 because it'll introduce us to a couple other elements along the way. In line 161, we have a paragraph element with the opening tag and the closing tag. We have the style in blue, that's the attribute. And then in red would be all of the different values of how that attribute is defined. We also have the black. You notice in this case, there was other black in all of this, but you notice here, this was the actual content of the mailing, the lorem ipsum filler text. So that would be the front end, and that's what displays here. You know, there's black up above, and this won't display. But once we're in that body, in this case, line 161, that's what we're getting. And so really for proof of concept, this is the one that I can really demo out, is we can make changes to any of this in line. And that's the power of this. I will acknowledge probably more than once today that there's easier ways to do some of the things I'm showing you, but the reason I'm going to be doing things the way I'm doing them is for proof of concept and to really put a capstone on some of this work. So in this case, what is now line, I guess, 157, let's take a look at what we can do here. I'm going to make some updates. So it gives me a color and a hex code. Let's change that. Now, you don't need to worry about these specifically. I have some codes memorized because I use them a lot, especially for training. The zeros is going to be the color black. I'm just going to change this to a different color. We'll see it in a moment. So we've changed the color. Let's also change the font size from 16 to 24 in this case. And then just for fun, we're here. Let me make an update to the font family. Change that to Times New Roman, which is a serif font. Proof of concept only. When I then click OK, you remember the text before was black, it was small, and it was Arial. Well, now it is hideous, but it did exactly as it should have. It is cyan, it's a little bit larger, and it is in Times New Roman. I say proof of concept because absolutely, you could have just highlighted over this and used this WYSIWYG editor to make these changes, but you never know when you might be looking at something more advanced. I'm thinking of a use case like when you are hard coding conditional logic or liquid markup. That's usually better done for intermediate and advanced uses in the source as opposed to using the button for it. So that's a use case for somebody transitioning from beginner into intermediate in HTML knowledge. As a last point here, I'll just mention, and actually let's revert some of these things. Let's bring it back to what we had, which was black and 16, and I'll keep the font Times New Roman for now. The last point I'll make is we can also make any of these updates truly inline now. So let me add in what would be referred to as an anchor element that is typically thought of as something like a link. And another one you can put in your vocab. I'm going to add in href. Another one to add to vocab is this is going to be a link. I'm going to actually make a hyperlink hard-coded. Another one that's short. We could have just used the WYSIWYG editor for. We're here. This is our training today. I'm going to code this out. And you notice that in real time, Slate is also making some updates here. The colors are changing. It's recognizing and rendering things. And in this case here, I've just added a very simple link. I click OK. And look at that, we have the link. Key takeaways. You can do it. It's the biggest one. Even with a little basic knowledge, you'll be able to make substantial progress in using these tools for other things, like going into the code to make updates that you can't see on the front end, liquid markup, conditional logic, putting in content blocks. There are a lot of ways you could use this, but it's also helpful to troubleshoot. Maybe a bullet point isn't working the way you'd expect. So come in here, you're able to see these green sections are the elements, they're the containers. We have the attributes, which help define those elements further, and then we have their associated values. And typically, when we go down and see the text in black, at least in this body element section, that's going to be the content we would display on the front end. With that, I want to thank you for joining today for a short while. And if you have any other questions, I hope you'll reach out to us at carnegiehighered.com. Thanks so much for joining today.